Yes, sir, I am here.
Okay. So next lecture, she is working as a scientist at National Institute of Research in Reproductive Health from the 2006. She did her PhD from IIT Mumbai, and she had a lot of experience in the different issues abroad, uh, like in the University of Miami, Florida, University of Toronto, and other universities. So we know her for her contribution, particularly in antimicrobial peptides. Actually, databases are so popular all over the world that everybody is using them. Actually, she has done a great job, and Indian databases have a lot of impact, and her database has done a great job. Actually, so I will not take much time. I will request her to present her work. Actually, okay.
Thank you, Dr. Raghava, for having me here and for those wonderful introduction words. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes.
And are my slides visible?
Yeah.
All right. So I must say it is a very humbling experience to talk after, scientists such as Dr. Raghava, Dr. Manoj Kumar, who has such a huge body of work. And it's really a great journey to reach there, I must agree. So today in this presentation, I'll be talking about some of the online resources that we have developed at the Biomedical Informatics Center. So if you look at the databases that we have developed, we can actually categorize it into three areas. One is antimicrobial peptide related resources. Second would be the databases related to diseases. And the third would be generic ones, which I'll be talking about later. So in this talk, I'll mainly focus on our antimicrobial peptide related resources. So for the students, especially, I'll take it at a very basic level. So in case you all do not know what antimicrobial peptides are, as the name suggests, these peptides are antimicrobial in nature. They are components of innate immunity found in a wide range of organisms. They are mainly cationic in nature. So what I mean by cationic is they are positively charged, amphipathic, have both, hydrophobic as well as hydrophilic residues. They have diverse secondary structures like alpha helical, beta strand, various mechanisms of action. What I mean by mechanism of action is that an antimicrobial peptide can exert its activity mainly as pore formers, that is, they make pores in the membrane, or they could bind to a target, they could bind to DNA, prevent protein expression, so on and so forth. And because they have diverse mechanism of action, it is very difficult for the microorganism to develop resistance against it as compared to, say, antibiotics. Also, it has broad spectrum activity. For example, you will see the same peptide having antimicrobial, antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral, and sometimes even anti-cancer activity. So because of this limited resistance and the broad spectrum activity, there's a lot of research interest in developing antimicrobial peptides because of the resistance seen by antibiotics. So when we started our center in 2007, we thought that let us start our project in this fascinating field of antimicrobial peptides, and let us see if we can develop a database on antimicrobial peptides. So that is how we started in 2010 with a database called as Collection of Antimicrobial Peptides with 4,020 sequences. And these sequences are basically fetched by reading literature. Each and every literature was read. The exact sequence which actually caters to the antimicrobial activity was fetched out. Annotations such as what is the inhibitory activity, what are the target organisms. Sometimes an antimicrobial peptide can be antimicrobial against, say, gram-positive but not gram-negative. So whatever information was available from those experimentally validated, resource, basically literature, we actually extracted it and made a database, and that database was used for predicting antimicrobial peptides. So this was way back in 2010. And later on, we updated this database and with a second release in 2014. And we got a prediction accuracy of around the same. We could not improve the prediction accuracy in spite of the training data set. When we looked at the other antimicrobial peptide algorithms which are present, they also hovered around the 90 range, except for defense and PRED. So when we looked at defensin pred, it is basically catering to one particular family of antimicrobial peptides. So that is another aspect of antimicrobial. One is we can classify it as antimicrobial based on the activity. Second is based on the family it belongs to. Like for example, you can have frog antimicrobial peptides, you can have defensins, you can have meganins, you can have a lot of different families. And why are families important? So if you look at defensin, they have variable sequence composition, but they have a conserved cysteine framework. If you look at histatin, they're rich in histidine residues. Peptidols are rich in unusual amino acids such as amino acid, butyric acid. So imagine if you have to, collect all these antimicrobial peptide sequences and fetch out the important sequence features, you will lose out on these intricate details if the representation of histatins is less in our overall antimicrobial peptide database. So then we realized that why not, instead of pooling everything together, why not handle these antimicrobial peptide families separately? And then we were also wondering why is it not done so far? Because in 2014, it was like unlikely why people didn't think of it. And then when we looked at how do we get this family description, we found that there are different ways. One is to go to the SwissProt database. One is to go to the PFAM or the family database of Interpro. And third is actually by reading literature. And then we realized that when we started this exercise, it is not at all trivial. Like there were cases where for a peptide, it was all the three resources pointed to the same family, like secropins. But for many of the peptides, SwissProt did not give us any information. Interpro gave something else. Literature gave something else. Like for example, frog antimicrobial peptide is a family. But then all skin, the skin of the frog secretes many antimicrobial peptides. So either you call it broadly as frog antimicrobial peptide, or you call it as, say, a temporin or a meganin. So it all depends on context on how people do it. So we realize that there is no uniformity the way people call antimicrobial peptide family. So this was a painstaking task, and finally we ended up getting family descriptions for around 3,000 sequences, with 53 families were identified, everything almost manually curated. And then now that we had this family description, what we did next is to use this to fetch out more antimicrobial peptides. So I hope the students who are here know about what are patterns and HMMs. So when you have a protein family, these protein family have signatures. These signatures could either be called as patterns, or it could be position specific scoring matrix, it could be HMMs. So what we did is, for those for which we have experimentally validated information, we generated the patterns and HMMs, and we use this to search against the protein sequence database. The question that we asked here is that, can we use this to get peptides, antimicrobial peptides from protein databases? So such an exercise, we realized, will give us three types of end results. One is we could probably end up getting an antimicrobial peptide, that is class 1. Second is we can get a predicted antimicrobial peptide, highly probable, class 2. And third is there is no definition of antimicrobial peptide anywhere, but our pattern or an HMM that we have generated using these proteins are actually present. I'll explain this the next slide. Take this example. Now, this is an example of a protein that we identified using the pattern. When you look at the definition of this in the SwissProt or the NCBI GenBank, we see that in the definition itself, it mentions it as cathelicidin. So this belongs to our class 1, meaning it has predicted it correctly. A second case is where in the definition, there is no mention of it being antimicrobial, but later on down, you will see somewhere saying that it is probably a gallidermin, which is again antimicrobial peptide. So these belong to the class 2. That is, there is a high probability of these being antimicrobial. A third is where neither the definition nor anywhere in the record do you see for that protein it being mentioned as antimicrobial, but our protein, our signature from either a pattern or a HMM says that it is probably an antimicrobial peptide. So now we have this huge repository of peptides sitting as class 1, class 2, class 3. And what we did is we took randomly few from our class 2s and class 3s for experimental validation. Why we did randomly is because this requires a huge amount of fund, because we'll have to actually synthesize these peptides and then look at the antimicrobial activity. So we restricted, I believe to 10 to 11 or 12 peptides from each, and we try to experimentally validate it. And what we identified is that many of them were actually antimicrobial. So from the family's specific signatures, we could get around 837 antimicrobial peptides, which were not present in the CAMP database. These were not present because either the definitions were not very clear, or maybe came after the update on which we have actually stopped searching PubMed. But we realized that these patterns could really fetch out antimicrobial peptides. And we could also rationally design 2 peptides which showed potent antimicrobial activity and negligible hemolytic activity. So as I said, many of these antimicrobial peptides are pore formers, and care has to be taken that when we design an antimicrobial peptide, it should not affect the mammalian cell and selectively make pores only on the microbial cell. So one way to assess it is by using RBCs, and if it shows negligible hemolytic activity, that means your peptide is rather properly safe. So we have 2 patents over here, which we found that the peptides had, these were novel peptides in the sense it was not a natural sequence. So this is the power of our patterns and signatures that we could get out of the whole exercise. And now and this is how we developed the 3rd release of CAMP, and which has got sequences, structures, patent information, and the signatures. So of the different antimicrobial peptide families. The applications of CAMP database so far has been, it has been used to develop several other databases. So when people develop databases, they also look at existing databases. I've given an example of 2 where they have used the data present in our database to develop databases. Our database has also been used to develop other prediction algorithms, wherein they looked at our data because it is manually curated, it's always useful. And then they have used it to develop other prediction algorithms. We were very happy to see that our database was also used to identify novel antimicrobial peptides from natural sources. Like, for example, 11 potential antimicrobial peptides were identified from milk proteins, soy milk proteins, so on and so forth. We have been very happy, like, when our server goes down, we get an email saying that please look into your server, it looks like it's down. And then we say, oh, is it? So it is pretty popular and we are very happy about it. But I must agree that our representation of antiviral peptides are very low, and we are looking at it and how we can improve the same. It's mainly for antibacterial and antifungal. There was also another, comparison study where a group looked at, compared the web-based antimicrobial peptide prediction algorithms, and they checked 6 general antimicrobial prediction algorithms and found ours to be very good. This also was a very good motivation for us. What we next did is we took these antimicrobial peptide information, because we know that it is very difficult to give the family definition of these antimicrobial peptides. What we did is we took these peptide information, generated patterns in HMMs of all what we had, and then developed an algorithm called as CAMP-SIGN, which is a database for identification of the protein families. So this is available online. What you can do is the users can actually paste sequences or upload a list of protein sequences, and then the tool will tell you what kind of family it is, which pattern is present, and how many HMMs are present. So this is another tool that we have for antimicrobial peptides. As I said, antimicrobial peptides can also be classified based on their targets, like antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral. So we have an algorithm which will try and tell us what is a class of antimicrobial peptides. Here it's a multi-class problem because the same peptide could be both antifungal as well as antibacterial. And these 2 databases need an update, and we are looking at it, how we could update this. So next, coming to the disease-related databases that we have. So what we realized as part of ICMR, that is my parent organization, we are expected to develop resources which helps in disease management. So we thought that why not also use our skill sets to develop gene-based disease databases, where we can actually look at the resources from, say, read literature and find out what are the genes involved in few diseases which are not well represented with respect to databases. So we have good databases on, say, cancers, but if you look at reproductive disorders like, say, PCOS or precocious puberty, we do not have any disease databases. So we thought let's look at to that aspect. So PCOS, as we all know, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is a very common endocrine disorder of women, especially in the reproductive age, and it is a common cause of female subfertility. What is very annoying and also interesting from the database point of view is that many of the PCOS women, they are more prone to develop type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular ailments, anxiety disorders as compared to women without PCOS. So our aim was to see that once can we identify through manual curation genes that are involved or associated with PCOS. Of course, we cannot see the cause-effect relationship very well, but at least associations with, are just associated, can be looked from literature. And then we also have many online resources like say DisGeneNet, POMIM, DBSNPs, and see whether there are any common genes between these diseases like cardiovascular ailments, anxiety disorders, and can we have an algorithm to kind of have a comorbidity risk. So that was our objective from this for this database. So we have developed an online database called as PCOS-KB. The first database was in nucleic acid research, and then the second update is in scientific reports. Yeah, so one more thing which I, especially for students and my experience that I would like to share is sometimes, the journals that accept your work is sometimes not really proportional to the amount of work that you do, which many of you all will agree. Sometimes the amount of work required is huge, but then since it caters to a small audience, or it is not very broad, some journals are not really interested in taking your work, but that should not deter you as long as a small community or whoever is actually benefiting from your work. So then we thought that it's okay that it is not very generic and it has not a broad outreach, but still we went ahead with it. And for a second update, and what we did is like we did for antimicrobial peptides, we read literature, that is, we manually curated the literature that talks about PCOS and the related mesh terms. Many of these diseases have many synonyms. So we have to take care that all the mesh terms were taken care of. And then we also went into the expression data sets, like we have the GEO data sets on PCOS. So we did a meta-analysis of the GEO data sets for PCOS and identified all the associated genes of PCOS and made a database out of it. From there, whichever were coding genes, we had a protein annotation, we had the SNP annotation coming from these GWAS catalog, we had the ontology association, and this was provided in the database. Next, what we did as a secondary data analysis is we did the comorbidity analysis. So what I mean by comorbidity analysis is that we know that comorbidity risk can be calculated using different ways. One is using shared genes. Second is looking at uniqueness of shared genes. It is known that if a gene is shared and it is not commonly seen as a cause of a disease, that a comorbidity risk is more. It is seen that the distance between two genes that are interacting is smaller, the comorbidity risk is higher. So there are different ways by which comorbidity risk can be predicted. We used all the different methods to give a comorbidity risk prediction. And then we also, so basically we could get around 533 manually curated information on genes associated with PCOS, 145 SNPs, 29 miRNAs, so many pathways and diseases. We interlink this with as much information as possible from the online tools that are available. We did a comorbidity analysis and represented it as a heat map for the users. When analysis was made possible for what are the shared proteins, what are the shared SNPs, what are the shared diseases coming from the input list. And of course, a network analysis where users can actually find out what are the important target genes and pathways. So let me explain this in a little detail. So what we were looking at is something like this, where a user can actually go to your disease group. I completely forgot to use pointer, I apologize. So a person can go to the disease group and say, I want to understand what is the comorbidity risk of cardiovascular diseases. Initially, we said that we will give all the disease terms like this, but then we realized that for users, it's going to be really tough because under cardiovascular diseases, there are so many different types of diseases. So then we wanted to categorize all the diseases as a disease parent group and the sub-diseases so that the users can select which disease the person wants to check and find the comorbidity risk using either of these algorithms, which is shared genes, uniqueness of shared genes, shared ontologies, and network-based separation, as I discussed before. So this was a level of, again, a lot of manual curation here. What we did is we realized that the disease terms were really a lot. So what we had to do is we had to go through it and then make a manual, kind of a mapping column, say that anything to do with, say, undernutrition deficiency diseases, we would call it as nutritional and metabolic diseases, so that, you have a parent group where it makes it easier for the user to select the type of disease. Similarly, we have for nervous system disorders, immune system diseases, Based on the target organ, we had reproductive diseases, cardiovascular diseases, so on and so forth. So this would help to club a lot of these, several disease terms under one parent term. And second is also, we found that there are many diseases had, kind of, we can call it a kind of redundancy, wherein you have, for example, mental depression, major depressive disorder, depressive disorder. These are different terms, and these terms are used by the authors to say that, okay, gene A is related with major depressive disorder. Gene B is related with major depression, mental depression. But then there was some kind of a mental curation required to get these terms into one bin by, again, a lot of manual curation, and we get a modified term. I do agree that such kind of reduced redundancy will also lead to some type of a loss of information, but then that was required for the larger agenda of making it user friendly for people. So like this, we could finally end up with a disease group. We could end up with a list of diseases and the selected disease. And once we do the comorbidity risk, users could also identify which are the important mechanisms which are contributing to the comorbidity risk, which are the important pathways that are contributing, which are the important genes that are contributing based on the algorithm. We did the same exercise for precocious puberty as well. And see, precocious puberty is wherein puberty is attained before 8 years in girls and 9 years in boys. The disease as such is bad, and more worse is that many of these, it is known that many of these, children with precocious puberty end up with more comorbidity risk as compared to children without precocious puberty. So we realize that we need a resource to actually systematically study the comorbidity risk. I forgot to mention earlier, so the way that we validate many of our predictions is actually going to the clinical notes. So suppose we find that a particular disease, say for example, precocious puberty, PCOS, well, it seemed to, we got a high comorbidity risk with anxiety, or we got a high comorbidity risk with a particular disease. The way we validated it is actually by going back to literature and looking at clinical notes. Are there any clinical notes, clinical papers that talk about, such kind of comorbid risk in PCOS women? Similarly, whatever we get here from precocious puberty, also from the analysis, we went back and looked at clinical notes to say that how many of the precocious, children with precocious puberty end up with having this kind of comorbid risk. Ideally, we need cohort, long-term cohort-based studies to validate our prediction algorithms. But since that is not feasible, we resort to such kind of literature reports for our algorithm. So this is the online database that we have developed for precocious puberty, also called Precocity DB. Available, all the resources are freely available online. And interestingly, again, based on interaction analysis and disease enrichment analysis, we found that the precocious puberty children are at high risk for developing reproductive and metabolic disorders such as PCOS, hypogonadism, insulin resistance, and hormone-dependent neoplasm. And many of these findings were validated based on clinical reports from individual clinicians. Another database that we had created long back is a database on blood coagulation factors. And this again caters to a very small niche of audience who are working on the area of disease databases, clot factors. We also have developed few generic databases like Pipeline Builder for infectious diseases and Gene Disease Pathway Network database. In case of this PBIT, which is Pipeline Builder for Identification of Targets, it's basically a pipeline builder where users can use this database or this resource to identify potential novel targets for pathogenic proteomes. So the user can actually put in a proteome of their interest, and then based on subtractive genomics, components such as non-homology to human, non-homology to gut microbiome, and then homologous to, say, essential genes and virulent factors, you can get a list of novel genes which could be explored as targets for infectious diseases. The way we validated this is by actually, again, going to literature and see that if we have got 100 novel targets, how many of them are actually reported for these targets in literature, because we had not used that while we were building this tool. So that way it is an unseen test data set for us. And that is one way by which we validated. And the validation of the other targets are still ongoing. My PhD student Shuvecha has a poster on this, and she'll be explaining more about this in her poster session. Another database that we have built, this is also a lot of work where we, whatever we did for PCOS and for precocious puberty, we took it to the level of all genes and all diseases, and that is what is called GDIPNet. wherein again, the same kind of disease redundancy was handled. And again, my PhD student, Indra, will be talking about this in her poster session. So I will not get into much of these details here. That's kind of the end. So I would like to acknowledge the work of my team, that is Ram, who is a technical officer, who's the brain behind all these interfaces, the way it looks. My PhD student Faiza has done most of the work on antimicrobial peptides. It was started by Shiny, a scientist, and then Faiza took it up. Shuvecha, as I said, is working on the PBIT part. Indra is working on GDIPNet. Pradila helped in the PCOS and the precocious puberty, and then the others have helped in the different algorithms of these databases. I think that is all I have. And yes, I must acknowledge the funding source that has made it possible. Department of Biotechnology, specifically for the databases. SCRB funded most of the antimicrobial peptide work, and especially I also thankful to SCRB Star Award for the work that I've done for antimicrobial peptides, and my parent organization, ICMR. That's it. Thank you for your patient hearing.